The third party vanished. And what your soulmate just confessed will break you. My beloved child. The third party didn't simply walk away. They vanished from your soulmate's life so suddenly that even your soulmate was left staring at the silence, wondering what had just happened. No final argument. No dramatic goodbye. Just distance, and then nothing. But here is where everything changes. Because once that person disappeared, your soulmate stopped pretending that everything was fine. The distraction was gone. The excuses were gone. And in that uncomfortable quiet, one truth kept returning to them: you. Your name. Your memory. The conversations they replay when nobody is around. They tried to convince themselves that moving forward meant forgetting what existed between you, but the harder they tried, the clearer something became. The third party had never replaced you emotionally. They had only helped your soulmate avoid facing what they still felt. And now there was nowhere left to hide. Don't skip, because what your soulmate admitted after that disappearance was not what anyone expected. It happened during a conversation they never planned to have. Someone close to your soulmate noticed the change immediately. They weren't acting relieved that the third party was gone. They weren't celebrating their freedom. Instead, they seemed quieter, almost distracted, as though losing that connection had uncovered something much deeper. Finally, the question came: why do you look more upset now than before? Your soulmate hesitated. Then came the confession. They admitted that the third party had known about you almost from the beginning. Not every detail, but enough to understand that there was someone your soulmate could never speak about casually. Someone whose absence still carried weight. And then your soulmate revealed something even more surprising. The third party had asked them one simple question weeks earlier. If that person came back into your life tomorrow, would there still be room for me? Your soulmate couldn't answer. That silence became the answer. Stay till the end, because the reason the third party vanished begins with what they understood in that exact moment. But that wasn't the confession that changed everything. Your soulmate lowered their voice and finally admitted what they had been afraid to say out loud. They had compared almost every meaningful moment with the third party to something they remembered about you. Not appearances. Not possessions. Something much harder to replace: the way they felt understood around you. They confessed that whenever something important happened, there was still an instinct to tell you first. Whenever they imagined finally being completely honest with someone, your face entered their mind. And the third party eventually noticed. They didn't disappear because they had been defeated or pushed away. They stepped aside because they realized they were standing inside a story that emotionally had never been finished. But something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate made one more confession after saying all of this. A confession about the last thing the third party told them before leaving. And when those words were repeated aloud, everyone in the room suddenly understood why your soulmate had been unable to move on from you. The room became strangely quiet when your soulmate finally repeated those last words. Before disappearing, the third party had looked at them and said, "You keep trying to build something new while your heart is still waiting somewhere else." Your soulmate had denied it immediately, but the sentence followed them long after that conversation ended. Then came the detail nobody else knew. The third party had noticed that whenever your name was mentioned, your soulmate changed. Their voice softened. Their attention sharpened. Even when they tried to act unaffected, something emotional slipped through. And eventually, the third party stopped asking whether your soulmate still cared about you. They already knew. What they wanted to understand was why your soulmate had never done anything about it. That question forced your soulmate to confront something they had avoided for far too long, and their answer revealed that the real obstacle had never been another person. What your soulmate confessed next surprised even the person listening. They admitted they had been afraid that too much time had passed. Afraid that you had emotionally closed the door. Afraid that returning after everything would make them look uncertain rather than sincere. So instead of facing that possibility, they chose distance and tried to convince themselves that silence was easier. But silence didn't erase anything. It only gave the unfinished feelings more room to grow. Then your soulmate revealed something else. There had been several moments when they almost reached out to you. A message was started and erased. Words were rehearsed but never spoken. One night, they even decided they would finally tell you everything, only to change their mind because they couldn't predict your response. Don't skip. Because the third party somehow discovered that hesitation, and instead of becoming angry, they said something that completely changed the way your soulmate saw the situation. They told your soulmate that uncertainty was not the same as absence of love. Sometimes people hesitate precisely because something matters too much to handle carelessly. That realization stayed with your soulmate. After the third party vanished, they went back through memories they had deliberately avoided and began noticing a pattern. Every attempt to move forward had eventually led their thoughts back to the same unfinished conversation with you. And then came the confession that made everything suddenly feel different. Your soulmate admitted they were no longer asking themselves whether they still cared. They already knew the answer. The question haunting them now was whether they had waited too long to tell you. But there was one final detail they had kept hidden from everyone, the real reason they nearly contacted you immediately after the third party disappeared. Something happened that same evening, something so perfectly timed that your soulmate stopped seeing your unfinished story as something they could simply ignore. That same evening, your soulmate came across something they thought had been gone for months, a small reminder connected directly to you. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone else would have understood, but it carried a memory so specific that they froze. Suddenly, they remembered a conversation between you two that had seemed ordinary at the time. You had said something about how real connections do not always disappear just because people stop speaking. Back then, your soulmate barely understood the weight of those words. Now they did. They sat there realizing the third party had vanished on the exact day they were forced to confront the one memory they had spent so long avoiding. And for the first time, instead of pushing the feeling away, they allowed themselves to ask the question that frightened them most: what if losing you had never been what they truly wanted? That question opened everything. Your soulmate confessed that they had quietly followed pieces of your life from a distance, not obsessively, but enough to wonder whether you were happier without them. Every sign that you were moving forward created two opposite emotions inside them. They wanted you to be happy, yet they also feared becoming nothing more than a chapter you had already finished reading. Then someone asked the question your soulmate had been avoiding: if you could speak to them right now, what would you actually say? For several seconds, there was silence. Then your soulmate answered, "I would tell them I should have been honest sooner. Stay till the end, because those words were only the beginning." What came afterward revealed why they had stayed silent even when every part of them wanted to reach toward you. Your soulmate finally admitted that their greatest fear wasn't rejection. It was hearing that you had once waited for honesty, but eventually stopped waiting. That possibility hit harder than anything the third party's disappearance had caused. Because suddenly your soulmate understood what had really been lost during all that silence: opportunities. Moments when one honest conversation might have changed everything. And then they revealed something nobody in that room expected. Before disappearing, the third party had encouraged them to stop hiding behind uncertainty and finally settle the unfinished truth with you, not because anyone could guarantee the outcome, but because pretending had already hurt everyone involved. Your soulmate took those words seriously. They began writing down exactly what they wanted to tell you, removing every excuse until only the truth remained. But when someone asked whether they planned to send those words, your soulmate gave an answer that changed the entire conversation: "Not yet. There's something they need to know first." And what they meant by that was far bigger than anyone realized. What your soulmate meant by "something they need to know first" had nothing to do with the third party anymore. It was about a decision made long before that person ever entered the picture. Your soulmate confessed that there had been one moment when they deliberately stepped away from you, even though everything inside them wanted to stay. At the time, they convinced themselves they were protecting both of you from uncertainty. But now they could finally admit the truth: they were scared of how deeply the connection affected them. You weren't easy to forget because you weren't ordinary to them. Being around you made them imagine possibilities they weren't emotionally prepared to face. So they chose the option that seemed safer: distance. And that choice created the very emptiness they later tried to fill with someone else. Now, with the third party gone, your soulmate could finally see the chain of decisions clearly. Then another confession surfaced, and this one changed the meaning of everything. Your soulmate admitted that the third party had never demanded that they forget you. In fact, toward the end, that person did the opposite. They noticed your soulmate becoming quieter whenever the future was discussed, as though every plan came with an invisible question mark. Finally, the third party asked, "Are you choosing this life because you want it, or because you're afraid to return to the one you actually wanted?" Your soulmate had no answer. Don't skip, because that question stayed with them for days. Eventually, they realized something uncomfortable. They had been making decisions based on what felt easiest to explain rather than what felt emotionally true. And once the third party understood that, they stopped trying to compete with a connection your soulmate had never properly resolved. But here is where the story takes another turn. Your soulmate confessed that after writing those unsent words to you, they made a second list: everything they believed you deserved to know before they ever asked for another chance at conversation. On that list were apologies, missed opportunities, misunderstandings, and one secret they had never admitted to anyone. Someone in the room asked what that secret was, and your soulmate hesitated longer than before. Then they revealed that there had been a specific day when you probably believed they had completely stopped caring. The truth was almost the opposite. Something happened behind the scenes that day, something that made your soulmate choose silence even while wanting desperately to explain themselves. Stay with this, because when they finally described what happened on that day, it became clear that the third party's disappearance was only uncovering a much older truth, and one person besides your soulmate already knew the entire story. The person who already knew the entire story had been closer to your soulmate than anyone realized. They had witnessed that difficult day from beginning to end, and they knew your soulmate's silence had never meant indifference. Your soulmate confessed that something had happened privately that left them questioning whether reaching out to you would make your life more complicated. Instead of asking what you wanted, they made the decision for you. They stepped back. They told themselves that if the connection was real, maybe distance would eventually make everything clearer. But it did the opposite. Days became weeks, silence became normal, and eventually both of you were left interpreting an absence that neither of you had properly explained. The person who witnessed it all had warned your soulmate, one day, they may believe you disappeared because they meant nothing to you. Those words had stayed buried for a long time. Now your soulmate admitted that this was exactly what they feared had happened. Then came the detail that made their confession even harder. Your soulmate revealed that the third party had eventually spoken with this person too. Not to investigate you or create drama, but because they could sense there was an unfinished story they didn't understand. What they learned changed their perspective completely. They discovered that your soulmate had not entered that new connection with an empty heart. There was still regret attached to you, still unanswered questions, still words waiting to be spoken. Suddenly, the third party understood why certain moments felt distant even when everything appeared normal. Stay till the end. Because instead of demanding that your soulmate choose between two people, the third party asked one question: if you knew they had misunderstood your silence all this time, would you finally tell them the truth? Your soulmate answered immediately. Yes. And that single answer was when the third party knew it was time to leave. But your soulmate's most emotional admission came afterward. They said the third party's disappearance didn't create their feelings for you, it removed the final distraction keeping them from admitting those feelings were still there. Then they confessed something they had never allowed themselves to say before: if you believed you were forgotten, they regretted giving you every reason to believe it. They wished they had trusted you enough to explain what was happening instead of deciding alone what was best. And now the message they had written was no longer sitting untouched. Your soulmate had changed it. Shortened it. Removed every excuse. What remained was one clear truth and one question meant only for you. But just before they were ready to send it, the person who knew the entire story stopped them and revealed something about your side of that old misunderstanding. Something your soulmate had never known, and something that could completely change what happens next. What that person revealed stopped your soulmate completely. They explained that during the old misunderstanding, you may not have been waiting for perfection or some grand explanation. You may simply have needed honesty. Your soulmate had spent all this time assuming their distance protected you, never realizing that unexplained silence could have created a completely different message. Suddenly, every decision looked different. They remembered moments when they could have spoken but chose not to. They remembered convincing themselves there would always be another opportunity. And now they understood why the third party's final question had affected them so deeply. This was never only about choosing between two people. It was about whether your soulmate would finally stop letting fear make decisions that honesty should have made instead. For the first time, they admitted, "I kept waiting for the perfect moment, and maybe that waiting became the mistake." But then something unexpected happened. Instead of immediately sending the message, your soulmate deleted almost everything they had written and started again. No dramatic promises. No attempt to pressure you. No blaming timing, circumstances, or the third party. They wanted the words to sound like the truth, even if the truth didn't guarantee the answer they hoped for. Don't skip, because one sentence remained unchanged through every version. "There is something about my silence you deserve to know." That line mattered because your soulmate finally understood that reconnecting with you could not begin with asking for anything. It had to begin with taking responsibility for what they had left unexplained. And the person beside them noticed something else. Your soulmate wasn't talking about winning you back anymore. They were talking about giving you the missing piece of the story, even if you decided your life had already moved forward without them. Then came the confession nobody expected after everything that had already been revealed. Your soulmate admitted that before the third party vanished, they had been asked whether they would still tell you the truth if they knew you might never respond. At first, they couldn't answer. Now they could. "Yes, because they deserved the truth before I ever deserved another chance." The room went silent again. Something had shifted. Your soulmate was no longer searching for a comfortable ending, they were preparing themselves for an honest one. But just as they reached for the message, the person who knew the old story told them there was one more detail they had withheld for years. A detail about the final conversation surrounding your separation. Your soulmate looked confused and asked why nobody had told them sooner. The answer changed their expression instantly, "Because we thought you already knew." And what they revealed next made your soulmate realize the misunderstanding between you had been far bigger than either of you understood. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't say anything. The missing detail was painfully simple. During that final period between you, a message had apparently been misunderstood. Something you meant as an invitation for honesty had reached your soulmate as though you were closing the door. They had carried that interpretation for all this time, believing you wanted distance, while you may have been waiting for clarity they never gave you. Suddenly, years of silence looked different. Your soulmate asked to hear the exact circumstances again, searching for the moment where everything had gone wrong. Then they whispered something nobody expected. "So we both walked away thinking the other person had already decided?" That realization changed the entire room. Stay till the end, because your soulmate's next decision wasn't emotional or impulsive. For once, they wanted to understand everything before making another assumption. They began asking questions they should have asked long ago. What exactly had been said? Who had heard it? What had been assumed rather than confirmed? Piece by piece, the old story started separating into facts and interpretations. And your soulmate discovered something important: neither side had possessed the complete picture. The distance had grown from hesitation, timing, and words that were never clarified. That didn't erase the hurt, but it explained why both of you could remember the same ending so differently. Then your soulmate looked at the message they were preparing to send and changed one final sentence. Instead of asking whether you still felt the same, they wrote that they wanted to explain what happened and hear your side without expectations. Don't skip. Because just when it seemed they were finally ready, someone asked whether the third party knew about this old misunderstanding before disappearing, and your soulmate's answer opened another mystery. They did. In fact, your soulmate confessed that learning. The missing piece was only a few words, but it completely changed the meaning of that old moment. Your soulmate had remembered the message as a goodbye, something final that told them to stop trying. But the complete version carried a different feeling. There had been uncertainty in it, yes, but there had also been an opening, an invitation to explain what they truly wanted before everything slipped away. Somehow, your soulmate had focused entirely on the painful part and overlooked what came afterward. They stared at those words again and again, realizing they had spent all this time believing the door had been closed when, at least in that moment, it may still have been open. Then came the confession that made everyone quiet. I didn't lose the chance because there was nothing left. I lost it because I was too afraid to ask what those words really meant. And suddenly, the third party's disappearance felt less like an ending and more like the moment your soulmate could no longer avoid the truth. But your soulmate didn't rush toward you. That was the surprising part. Instead, they became more careful than ever, because discovering the misunderstanding didn't give them permission to rewrite your present. They knew time had passed. They knew you might see everything differently now. So they changed the message once more, removing every sentence that sounded like an expectation. What remained was honest and simple. They wanted to acknowledge their silence, explain what they had misunderstood, and give you space to share your version only if you wanted to. Stay till the end, because your soulmate then admitted something even deeper. They said they weren't afraid of hearing that you had moved forward. What frightened them was realizing you might have spent part of that time believing you had never mattered. That possibility was the part they couldn't accept without finally telling you what had really happened. Then the person beside them asked one last question. If you could change only one thing, what would it be? Your soulmate didn't say they would erase the third party. They didn't say they would rewrite every mistake. They said, I would have spoken before silence started speaking for me. That answer revealed how much had changed. The third party had vanished, but instead of celebrating or immediately running backward, your soulmate was finally confronting the choices that had created this unfinished story. And then something huge happened. As they prepared to send the message, they noticed there was already something waiting, something connected to you that had arrived earlier and gone unnoticed. Your soulmate opened it expecting nothing important. But after reading the first few lines, they stopped completely. Because whatever they had expected to discover about your side of the story, it wasn't this, and suddenly, the confession they had been preparing no longer felt like the biggest revelation between you. Nothing could have prepared your soulmate for what those overlooked words seemed to reveal. The message connected to you wasn't a dramatic declaration or a request for them to return. It was something quieter, and somehow that made it more powerful. It suggested that you had carried questions too. Questions about why everything changed without a real conversation, why distance appeared where honesty should have been, and whether your soulmate had ever understood what their silence looked like from your side. Your soulmate read it twice, then a third time. Suddenly, they weren't thinking about defending their choices anymore. They were imagining what those choices may have felt like to you. And that realization hit differently. For months, they had focused on everything they never got to say. Now they were finally considering everything you never got to hear. I thought I was preventing more confusion, they admitted quietly. Maybe I was creating it. That was when your soulmate did something completely unexpected. They stopped writing. They realized the confession couldn't be built around explaining themselves alone. If they truly wanted to repair the unfinished truth between you, they needed to listen as much as they spoke. So they rewrote the opening again, this time beginning with an acknowledgement instead of an excuse. They admitted they had made assumptions. They admitted they had allowed fear to interpret your intentions without giving you the chance to explain them. And most importantly, they made no demand for another opportunity. Don't skip, because this was the moment your soulmate finally understood what the third party had been trying to show them. The third party didn't vanish to magically bring you two together. They left because they refused to remain inside a connection where an unresolved past was silently shaping the present. Your soulmate could finally see that clearly, and what they did next proved they were no longer hiding from it. They pressed send. Then they placed the phone down without knowing whether an answer would ever come. No celebration. No certainty. Just the strange relief of finally telling the truth without controlling what happened afterward. Minutes passed. Your soulmate tried not to look at the screen, but then it lit up. Their expression changed immediately. Something had arrived, but it wasn't the response they expected. It was another piece of information connected to the third party. A final message that had apparently been left before they disappeared from your soulmate's life. Your soulmate opened it slowly, already believing they understood why that person had walked away. They were wrong. Because the final message revealed that the third party had discovered one more truth before leaving, something they intentionally chose not to reveal until your soulmate had finally contacted you. And when your soulmate reached the final sentence, they whispered, "How did they know this?" The answer was waiting in one last detail neither of you had seen coming. The final detail wasn't a secret scheme or some dramatic betrayal. It was an observation the third party had quietly made long before leaving. They had noticed that your soulmate kept describing the past as though everything between you had ended because the feelings disappeared. But whenever your soulmate actually told the story, the same pattern emerged. There had never been a clear ending, only assumptions followed by silence. In that final message, the third party wrote that your soulmate needed to stop confusing an unfinished conversation with a finished connection. Those words landed heavily. Your soulmate suddenly understood why the third party had waited until now to reveal them. If they had heard this earlier, they might have rushed toward you simply because they were afraid of losing you forever. Now they had done something different. They had reached out without demanding an outcome. And for the first time, the truth mattered more than getting the answer they wanted. Then your soulmate reached the final sentence, and everything became even clearer. The third party had written, "If you finally tell them the truth, don't ask them to return to who they were. Find out who they are now." Your soulmate read that line repeatedly. It forced them to recognize something they had overlooked throughout all their regret: time had changed both of you. Reconnecting could never mean pretending the silence hadn't happened. It would mean meeting each other again without assuming that old feelings guaranteed a new beginning. Stay till the end, because your soulmate admitted that this was the first moment they stopped imagining some perfect reunion and started hoping for something more believable, one honest conversation. No pressure. No promises. Just the chance to finally hear your side and tell you theirs. But as they finished reading, their phone lit up again. This time, the notification was connected directly to the message they had sent you. Your soulmate froze before opening it. Every confession, every misunderstanding, every regret had led to this tiny moment, yet suddenly they were afraid to know what waited on the other side. The person beside them said nothing. Your soulmate finally looked at the screen, and their expression changed almost instantly. Not because everything had magically been fixed. Not because they suddenly knew what the future would become. It was because your response contained a sentence they never believed they would hear after so much silence. Something that suggested the old misunderstanding had affected you too, but in a completely different way than they had imagined. Your soulmate read that sentence aloud, then stopped halfway through the next one. There was more. Something you apparently needed them to understand before any conversation could continue. And when your soulmate saw what you had finally revealed about the day everything changed, they realized their confession was only half of the truth. The other half had been waiting with you all along.